Welcome to Yell, Fight, Sooie, college football from three friendly-ish rivals.
Ton. Welcome to September 16th edition of Yell Fight Sooie. We're joined by James Christopher, proud Longhorn alumni, Scott McIntyre, who's a diehard fan of bathing in the hot springs and the University of Arkansas. And as for me, I'm Andy Tomchesson, and I'd like to take this brief opportunity to say, hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk to you again. One of those exciting, weird weeks that happens in college football sometimes. 5 top 20 teams lost this past weekend. And another one probably really should have without some help from the refs. It was a mixed bag for the three of us, but at the end of the day, among our 3 rooting interests, we still have a top 10 team. But to quote She-Hulk, it's not what you think.
First of
all 3 of our teams are in the top 25, but the trajectory for at least one of us, or actually 2 of us, has changed. I see that Scott is probably bursting at the seams to talk about Arkansas, South Carolina right now, so we're going to skip him and start with Jim.
I was just wondering if you had any new apps on your phone, Andy.
I'm not in a state to put apps on a phone.
Not yet.
My bad.
Jim, you've said a number of times that you don't do moral victories, but with a 5-7 record last year, and frankly being a fairly average program for the past decade, average being 7-5, 8-4, a little bit less sometimes. How big was your near miss against Bama this past weekend?
First of all, when you put it like that, boy, I want to cut myself. Yeah, look, I don't do moral victories. The only moral victory we should celebrate in the state of Texas is the Alamo. But, you know, we are all, I think, sports fans at a little bit higher intellect and understanding level. So obviously it's progress. I'm a little gun shy. You know, I was talking to you, Andy, about on Messenger about like the sort of the Astros, and the thing that worries you is how bad distractions can really derail a sports franchise. And I'm referring to the Cowboys of the 90s. We're going to see this week. But even this week, because of the quarterback injuries, it's not going to be as clear a picture of whether they've moved on. I immediately became, and talked to you guys on the text message, afraid of the hangover effect. Now, they could legitimately lose to UTSA, and it really would be the MASH effect, not but look, definitely progress. Defense looked really good. They played with a level of grit that I have not seen in the decade. And DKR reacted to a game like I've not seen in my lifetime.
So somehow I noticed you guys squeezed in 11,000 more people in that stadium than it actually holds. Fire marshals in Austin were obviously sleeping.
They got free tickets, so they're
it
like,
was 11 a.m. game. They might have slept in. We don't know.
They might have. But yeah, you can't help but look at progress, man.
But talk a little bit about those injuries, because I think Scott and I both have this perception of this is kind of what it is playing in the SEC, is that it's not just getting up to play Bama. It's the hangover of playing a team like Bama, and then you know, you have UTSA this week, which is a very solid group. I think Jeff Traynor is a very good coach. And I think that's a potential trap game for you guys. I think that both of you have potential trap games this week. But kind of going forward with that, Quinn Ewers is out 4 to 6 weeks, although progress has been made this week, and maybe it's only 2 or 3, I think I read. Hudson Card is going to try to give it a go maybe tomorrow. He's been practicing a little bit towards the end of the week, but he's got a high ankle sprain. So literally twisting the wrong way might knock him out again. Bijan Robinson is a little bit banged up, although he should go tomorrow. So you may be starting a sophomore scholarship quarterback, but was not a highly regarded guy coming out of college.
But a legacy.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I mean, you're right. And it goes back to what I said I thought would happen in the Alabama game when we had our show last week. I thought Texas would hang tough in the first half. I thought that depth would be the issue in the second half. And that of course, actually never really manifested itself. However, I do think depth is still the problem, and it's what Texas is building. And, you know, you talked about the injuries. In many ways, I'm more worried about Hudson Card's high ankle sprain than I am the shoulder sternum sprain for Quinn Ewers, because we've all seen athletes hobbled by a high ankle sprain for a season. Like it will come up on you when you don't expect it. So yeah, I mean, I'm a little nervous. wouldn't even use the word trap game because, again, I think Texas will be focused, but will they have the bodies to be focused is really the big question. And I think because UTSA doesn't have the same running back as last year, they're going to be a little bit more one-dimensional. And I think at that point, the Jimmies and the Joes, if you're talking about a one-dimensional game, I think the Jimmies and the Joes definitely favor the Longhorns.
Sure. And we'll talk a little bit more about UTSA versus Texas, which is happening at Darrell K. Royal, Texas Memorial Stadium, Earl Campbell, Vince Young Field, Taco Bell scoreboard. Well, I've lost.
I can't wait to see a lot of Verizon Wireless first downs. I'm very excited.
But we'll talk about that in a little bit. All right, Scott, tell us about the Spencer Rattler experience this weekend.
Oh, well, if you ask Spencer Rattler after the game, he was quite successful. As he said, they never really stopped us. Never mind the fact that he had like a 54 for a quarterback rating and completed half of his passes with a touchdown and a pick and got sacked 6 times.
Scott, didn't he say the Big 12 was actually tougher than the SEC? Like that might have been proof positive that he got hit too hard.
Yeah, I mean, Spencer Rattler to me is the guy with the brain of Rick Vaughn and the talent of Roger Dorn.
I do want
to use a baseball term. That's kind of where I got to go with that one. Look, dude, when you lose, like you lost in Fayetteville and you look lost at times, don't throw your defense under the bus and say, well, they didn't stop me. Shut up, Spencer Rattler. Let me tell you what it was for Arkansas fans last week. Fellas, it was a legit.
Oh, my God.
We were on the beach.
He brought props, Andy. Oh, boy. The game is raised.
I had no idea we were doing a show with Carrot Top.
No, man, look, South Carolina's defense couldn't stop our run. I told you last week, Raheem Rocket Sanders was the guy to watch that game for Arkansas. He had almost 200 yards in total offense, 2 touchdowns. He was catching the ball. He was running the ball. They couldn't stop the running attack, which was reminiscent when Darren McFadden set the NCAA record for yards in a game against them a few years ago. 15 years. Yeah, I'm living off that old thing. But we're 2-0. Arkansas's 2-0. And we
the top 10.
We have a very interesting thing happening this week, and then we get A&M, and then we get Bama, and by 2-3 weeks from now, A&M's going to have some things figured out. So. Yeah, right now I'm going to wear this stuff and I'm going to prop my feet up and drink my Mai Tai and just absolutely enjoy what we got going on before it gets really, really, really hard.
The game for this show, the game for this show has now been raised. Challenge accepted, dude.
And I hate to keep bringing up the Spencer Rattler piece of this show because it seems like it's going to be a theme because I know we play them later in the year. But it's fascinating to me that he absolutely bombed at Oklahoma. All the hype in the world, supposed to be a dark horse, not even really a dark horse Heisman candidate. They were pushing him as a Heisman candidate last year. Yeah. Got replaced in the middle of the Texas game.
Right.
I don't think he played anymore or not outside of mop-up time the rest of the year.
The biggest thing that Texas did, sorry to cut you off, but the biggest thing that Texas did to derail their season last year was actually knocking him around so much that he got benched. And then Texas didn't have an answer.
So he transfers to South Carolina to go play some Beamer ball. Good for him. Great for the opportunity. There's a coaching change at Oklahoma.
All the respect to Shane Beamer. Great coach.
100%, but Beamer ball.
Beamer ball.
But literally, as I have the TV turned on Fox Sports prior to the Texas-Alabama game starting, they're showing things to watch for. And it was Notre Dame, who lost, Texas, Alabama, and Spencer Rattler makes his SEC debut. Who cares at this point? I've got to think somebody at either ESPN or Fox Sports is related to Spencer Rattler or has invested in Spencer Rattler the way I invested in Eric Anthony rookie cards.
You also have to remember that was
wow.
That was good.
Wow.
But this was also the ESPN game, so they're going to tie something into Rattler's just who they chose because more people know about him. The truth is there's 2 quarterbacks in the NCAA right now that have completed over 40 touchdown passes and turned the ball over fewer than 10 times in their entire career. And that's Stroud at Ohio State and KJ Jefferson at Arkansas. But KJ Jefferson at Arkansas doesn't sound as flashy as Spencer Rattler at Oklahoma / South Carolina / whatever XFL team he'll be playing for in a couple of years. So but I will tell people, if you want the full Spencer Rattler experience from last week, when you go outside, lay on your back and look up at the sky, because he saw a whole lot of it last week.
God damn, Scott.
All right, so
I'm just gonna listen. You guys are fun. I don't even know.
Before we move on, what else good
Big.
did you see, Scott, this weekend from your Razorbacks?
This coming weekend?
No, this past weekend.
Oh,
We're
this
still in
past
the
weekend.
past.
No, I mean,
living in the past, which is something Arkansas fans should be used to.
Well, yeah, but as long as we're not counting the last decade, right? We don't count.
How about that game in 1970, huh? That was a good one for y'all.
Hey, Nixon attended that
1985 game in War Memorial Stadium when Arkansas shut down Kevin Murray or whoever it was at the end to beat A&M. I remember that being in the stands. That's one of my favorite experiences.
Yeah, that was the and I will tell you the A&M version of that game was the game where we were called for illegal touching of the ball.
Okay. Then you did that. You went out of bounds and came back in and touched it.
No, none of that happened. It was just
gentlemen, if we want to go
touching of the ball.
If we want to go Southwest Conference here, I'm sorry, there were 9 schools in the Southwest Conference. 8 of them were in the state of Texas. Every official, except for one, lived in the state of Texas.
All right, I'm done.
We're going to go through bad calls in the Southwest Conference. Let's book 2 hours and just give me the stage.
Okay.
All right, anyway. I'm host and I'm done listening to you. I asked you a question. I don't even want to.
I am trying to answer you. I will answer you right now. What else did we see last week? Look, the 2 secondaries having Miles Slusher and Jalen Catalan out, and it looks like Catalan's out for the year. For Arkansas with a torn shoulder muscle. I mean, a torn muscle in his back under his shoulder. I mean, guys, that sounds.
Yep.
So when you lose really one of your strong defensive leaders, a guy that is definitely NFL stock, he's gone. Probably gone for the year. Slusher has concussions. Probably won't play this week. Should be back against A&M from what I'm seeing. That hurts you defensively. But we had some young guys step up. It's kind of nice when the backups were guys that had been at Alabama and then transferred in.
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of feels like, oh, wow, we have depth. And to the point that you've made a million times, Andy, if you're going to survive in the SEC, you better have depth. So I think we've got the pieces in place. I love the defensive schemes. Barry Odom would rush at times. He would drop 8 at times. He was keeping Rattler off. I think that will continue. Offensively, I'd like to see our offensive line get a little bit more of a push. But they opened up some great holes, and I can't complain. The first game of the year, we replaced Treylon Burks with Trey Knox, who had 8 catches, 75 yards, 2 touchdowns. Didn't get a catch this last week, but other guys stepped up. So I like what I'm seeing as far as the distribution of the football. And so far, like the numbers I rolled off earlier for our quarterback, KJ Jefferson, he's careful with the football and puts it where it needs to be. I got no issues right now.
Yeah, and I don't know, watching some of the South Carolina game, I don't know that I believe Arkansas is a top 10 team. I mean, right now, they absolutely deserved what they got, but just kind of like I didn't believe A&M should be a top 10 team. I
do think that top 10s are diluted. I think there is, the cream of college football and the Bamas and the Georgias and the Ohio States that get all that recognition. And then everybody else is kind of feeding off the first scratch underneath there.
I think there's clearly 5 very, very, very good football teams right now, and the rest of us are trying to figure it out. And that's the reality of college football most years, to be honest.
Yeah.
Which is why the 12-game playoff is a little bit interesting, because you are going to have some people going in that maybe didn't deserve it or maybe had an easier path. But I think that's better than the current situation we have now.
You have that in every other sport.
One thing, I think you're right. And one thing I wanted to bring up, first of all, how much did I nail the Gary Patterson thing last episode?
You mean the next coach of Nebraska?
Yeah, maybe. But I was,
Lasso was going to be the next coach at Nebraska. That's really what they need right now.
But last week was just weird.
Wichita State.
Last week was just weird all the way. And I think the loss that actually surprised me the most was Notre Dame getting manhandled by Marshall. I just can't believe those guys are 0-3. I have a little love for Notre Dame. It was a weird week, like you said, Andy. It was all over the place.
Well, and I'll go ahead and take this bullet now. War Sun Belt. A&M absolutely laid whatever egg. It was the most disappointing and potentially devastating loss that I have seen as a fan, and that's saying something. Because we've Southwest Arkansas, we lost to them. And I can tell you exactly what happened. Jimbo Fisher decided to go as vanilla as possible and not scheme for App State. App State is too good a team to do that with. I think because of that, the team didn't take them seriously. And then you get into a panic situation where you start trying to score a touchdown with every play. And you had the quarterback fumble twice, wide receiver fumble once. And when you lose the turnover battle and you underestimate your opponent, you're going to lose games. And that's exactly what happened to A&M. And what is coming out of it is, I'm 95% sure, maybe 99% sure, that Max Johnson will be getting his first start as an Aggie this weekend against the University of Miami.
Well,
let me ask you, Andy, how much of it, though, you're a very reasonable football fan. How much of it do you think it really was they took them lightly, trap game situation, or how much of it is systemic problems that you might see at A&M?
There's probably some systemic problems, but the reality is that we got outcoached. I don't put a lot of blame on the players, although I think Haynes King. I like Haynes King. I like what he brings to the table. I like his mentality. The reality is, he's had 4 starts against not great competition. I don't think he's the guy. Maybe he has an opportunity to be the guy next year or at his next stop, because that's a thing that happens in college football now. But I just don't think he's the guy. I think the game is too fast for him. Mm-hmm. He looked, for all the world, like, I don't want to pick on anybody, but just his eyes got big, his feet got sloppy, and there just wasn't the presence that you need in the face of adversity, because they could have won that game. They could have won that game in the fourth quarter, and they just didn't. They didn't make the plays they needed to. And there's a whole different world of a close win to App State than a close loss to App State. Because App State, the way they approached us, the way they beat us the way they needed to. They owned time of possession at like time. 3/4 to a quarter of the game. 3/4 of the game, they held the ball. They weren't trying to score 63 points. So A&M fans who are trying to pat themselves on the back say, oh, we held them to 17. They weren't trying to score a lot of points. They were trying to hold the ball and get any points out of the possessions they had. I think our defense played okay.
But let me throw this at you, Andy, because you're talking about the quarterback, but you were also talking about the scheme. First of all, why didn't Jimbo Fisher go a different direction with the quarterback during the game? Mm-hmm. If Haynes King was the problem, why not try something in game to save it? And is this systemic from an A&M fan perspective, where Jimbo's taking these teams a little too lightly? I mean, what's your thoughts?
No, Jimbo Fisher is frustrating to me. I think he's an excellent coach, but he is loyal to a fault when he picks his quarterback.
Okay.
So
yeah.
Okay. And that's not just at A&M. It happened at Florida State. He picks his guy and he's going to ride with him until that guy 100% proves he can't do it, which should tell you a lot if you see Max Johnson starting that game Saturday night. It was
an A&M thing. You don't know what to expect. Is this a quarterback problem? Is this a coaching problem? Is this a team problem? You're going to find out tomorrow night. Yeah.
Here's what my suspicion is that we come out and look a lot better against Miami, because we're going to scheme specifically against Miami. If you look at last year with a worse quarterback room, by the time we played Alabama, Jimbo Fisher schemed the hell out of that game and beat Alabama because we were better prepared to play Alabama's game than we did pretty much any other game. Sure. And Fisher historically does that for a few opponents. So if you're going to play a Florida team, which Miami is one, I would expect he's going to give you his A game. Other than that, I think he likes to rely on his system. So if you're going to be a coach that puts in wrinkles and puts in new things, you can look at Alabama last year and see that they put in a lot of wrinkles and did things they didn't do up to that game and didn't do after that game, specifically to beat Alabama. And this year, I think what has happened, if you want to talk systemically, is that Fisher has realized the way to beat Alabama is going as vertical as possible and figured he could out-talent everybody else on his schedule. And so, especially when you're talking about Sam Houston and App State to begin your year, if you just look at those names on a schedule, I think we were very vanilla in scheme. I don't think there were any specific, we're going to scout these guys and see exactly what they're doing. And if you look at App State, they've got a couple of guys who made big differences in this game that are NFL talent that you could have schemed around. So there's a few factors. I think quarterback play was horrible. I think our O-line is still in transition, and we're going to get one of our All-Americans back this week, so that should help, although he hasn't played in a number of weeks. And I think Fisher and the staff are going to take the specifics of the game planning more seriously versus let's work on system things this week.
Sure. One of the things, you guys, I know I've shared with you, Andy, that I'm teaching a broadcasting class. One of my favorite students is a very fired up, loyal. He will be a 5th generation Aggie when he goes. He's starting to move into the camp that Mac Brown belonged in, that without a generational quarterback, high end mediocrity is the ceiling. And it was for Mac Brown. He had Vince Young, he had Colt McCoy, he exceeded. He had Chris Sims, Tyrone Swoops, he didn't. Are you there yet? Can you get there?
And I think that's a really lazy take, because part of being a college football coach is recruiting generational talent. So I don't understand the mentality of penalizing Mac Brown for recruiting Vince Young, because that's literally what you're doing.
I mean, that's fair. Point. Yeah, right.
I mean, that's literally, well, if he, had gone with Reggie McNeil at that point, then, he'd have been a better coach. That's just not a thing. Jimbo Fisher 100% gets credit for recruiting and developing Jameson Winston. He put other quarterbacks in the NFL. He had the ability to get Kellen Mond drafted in the 3rd round, which no other coach could have done.
Right.
So I don't think you penalize a guy for recruiting at a high level. And that's one of the things Jimbo Fisher does really well. I think where Jimbo Fisher is going to have to develop and grow as a coach is something similar to what Saban had to do. Granted, after winning number of national champions, is realize that the game has changed a little bit, especially offensively. And perhaps, and I see this coming maybe next year, hiring an offensive coordinator that actually calls plays. Because being a head coach, Jimbo Fisher calls his offense. And so when you have a performance like you had against App State, where you have 9 first downs against the Sun Belt team, that's on Jimbo Fisher. That's not just execution, because you should be able to pull out a clipboard, or I guess an iPad in 2022, scheme up a new play and go, they're doing this, we're going to do this now.
But isn't that the beginning of an end when the head coach starts giving up ball playing?
I don't think so at all, because
he fires a couple of assistants, and then the seat gets hotter.
I kind of agree with Andy, Scott. You're right. It's the beginning of the end if you have all new coordinators and you're still the head coach, but I think acknowledging the fact that the job is too big at A&M to be able to be the head coach and to be the offensive coordinator, I don't necessarily think that as the beginning of the end. I think it's
it's a pretty simple thing for us, because our offensive coordinator on paper is a guy called Daryl Dickey, who has a great history in Texas football, great history at the University of Memphis, very innovative with some of the offensive things he was doing when he was a head coach. He doesn't call plays. He was brought in to bring some RPO concept into Jimbo's base offense, which he did. So he's also in his late 60s, early 70s. He's going to retire. And I think the shuffling they've done this year, where they've put Damian Gregg as the quarterbacks coach, and Coley is moved from tight ends to wide receivers, and Dickey has moved to coaching tight ends. You're setting that up for Dickey to step down and bringing in somebody new. And I see it very much a situation where Saban doesn't call his own defense anymore. He doesn't call his own offense anymore. And I'm not comparing Fisher to Saban, because there's different levels of accomplishment. But I think it is, as Jim said, a recognition that the program at A&M requires a head coach who can pay attention to all 3 phases, not just the one he likes the most.
Let's call it 4 phases, because you're always dealing with the stuff outside the field with a team like A&M. It's the thing that got Charlie Strong at Texas. He never wanted to do that. And
I think that's valid. Recruiting is a full-time job in college football now. It's not something you do between the end of November and the beginning of January or February. Most of us grew up and you open the paper second weekend of February to find out who your team signed.
Right.
Oh, cool. Didn't know we were after that guy. Great.
What a real neat deal.
Yeah. Now you have grown men following 15, 16-year-olds around like women were following around the stars of Twilight.
Hey, you just threw a Trans Am out and everything worked out.
Yeah.
Sometimes for SMU, but it always worked
It
out.
didn't always work out. You might get paid back later, but it doesn't
Hey,
always.
SMU took over those payments. We were only out the down payment.
Right.
So moving on to next week, and before we get into what our teams are going to face, I want to talk a little bit about. There's not a lot of must-see TV in college football this week. There's only 2 games that I could find against where it's ranked versus ranked. One of those is BYU and Oregon. One of those is A&M versus Miami. A game I'll probably take a look at is Nebraska-Oklahoma. Not that I think Nebraska has a chance in hell of beating Oklahoma, but I like the traditional rivalries of college football.
Absolutely.
And
yeah.
that is one of the games that there was always regret. Even when both teams moved to the Big 12, they didn't play every year. That's one of those things that I think that makes college football better to see those kind of teams playing. So I'm going to be looking forward to that. What are you guys looking forward to this weekend outside of your own games?
Well, I actually was looking at that same game for the very same reasons that you talked about. I actually was surprised that OU is favored, but I'm surprised they're not favored by more. I think they're only like an 10 or 11 point favorite on that. But that's the same game I'm looking at. Now that we're getting close to conference play, looking at OU is sort of when I start to do it. So yeah, I think same game. Definitely don't care about Texas State Baylor. So the battle of I-35, I guess. I don't know.
I mean, Baylor's reeling. They lost the top 10, one of the top 10 teams that lost last week.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, Cal Notre Dame is actually interesting because Cal is not that talented, but they're 2-0. Notre Dame's 0-2. So who knows how that's going to go? And then the other one I have to look at is Penn State Auburn, just simply because I can't get a gauge yet where Auburn is at. They are as helter skelter as any team in the nation, but they're undefeated. And they're facing now number 22 Penn State comes down south of the Mason-Dixon to play them in Bama. So that one could go either way. James Franklin knows the SEC, but I don't know. So those are the games that I'm actually looking at. That and just the fact of Western Kentucky and Indiana, one of those teams is going to go to 3-0.
Yeah,
which is, that's as big of a shock as if you put a cattle prod in my backside. So we'll see what happens.
Hey, the Hilltoppers are strong. That's Jerry West, if you can find him. BYU and Oregon's an interesting game, and I think that's, if you're talking about ramifications on the rankings right now, it's probably the one to take a look at. Yep. On the other hand, it's in Oregon. It's going to be played at 9:00 at night. My time, I won't see a damn lick of it. I'll look at the score sometime Sunday morning.
Well, we have BYU on our schedule coming up later on in the year. So I'll probably watch that, and I'll probably stay up late because, first of all, I have insomnia, and second of all, I want to see what they're all about.
You're out saving the world on computers.
Before we do jump in, I get, the biggest news I think that came out of college football this week is that OU was forced to cancel 2 non-conference games with SEC opponents, creating the stir that maybe the move will happen sooner than later for Texas and OU moving to SEC.
There's a million moving parts to that story. Yes, those games were going to be canceled. They were going to be canceled anyway. I don't think either of those were scheduled for 23. I think based on what I've read, and of course, all of this could be negotiated out of, but contractually, if a team is leaving the Big 12 and you could get past the fact that Oklahoma has to come up with $90 million, $80 million to make that move early, which I think you can. I think ESPN has a vested interest. There's a couple of factors why I think it's 24. One is to leave the Big 12, you have to give 18 months notice, and that window's already passed for the 2023 season. Again, you could negotiate out of that. The bigger one is that the SEC's new television contract doesn't kick into 2024. And so if Texas and Oklahoma come in the 2023 season, you're effectively asking the other 14 teams in the SEC to take a pay cut because there's no impetus for ABC or ESPN or any of our other broadcast partners. There's only those 2 to give us extra money for those teams when they know they've already got a new contract sitting there for 2024. Now, the new contract in 2024 does have an escalator for adding additional teams. So all of that being said, I think that's the most likely. I think 2025 is the next most likely, and 2023 is the least likely.
Okay.
But
Fair
it's
enough.
happening soon.
I don't think any of us thought it was really going to last as long as they first said it was anyway. So
Well, and
Like-
I mean,
Like
effectively
breaking up with somebody and still having a lease that you got to share, right? Like, ooh, it's just not going to work out.
but
right.
effectively,
It's kind of like,
benefits-
220 somethings. They've been dating for 3 years, but they're telling everybody, no, we're really waiting for marriage. Sure.
there's a fine line, right? So it benefits Texas and Oklahoma to be able to recruit to the SEC without actually having to play an SEC schedule.
Yes.
So if you can build up a bunch of wins and you played Alabama close in Texas's case, but you get to build up enough wins against the Big 12, assuming that you do that against that schedule, then you get to recruit on another year of look how successful we are, look at our progression, and we're eventually going to be in the SEC by your sophomore year.
Yeah.
Versus jumping in next year and potentially taking your lumps without the depth that you need to not take those lumps. So, it goes either way, but I'm kind of sitting back on 2024 as being the year.
And before I know we're about to change topics and go somewhere else, but before that, I do want to mention, I think you touched on something very key there. I think that the Texas showing last week against Bama helped their recruiting a lot. I think that Sark and his staff can walk into houses now and go, they said we weren't ready for the SEC, but did you see that? Looks like we are. We're one player away. You want to sign here? I mean, it's a script.
No doubt it was a big weekend for Texas and Texas recruiting. I think the proof in the pudding is what they're going to do the rest of the season, because they do have to deal with other teams going, but 5-7 last year. And that is still a real thing for kids. And because typically the success you have in season affects the junior class, not the senior class.
Yes, but I think it impacts things less negatively now because the transfer portal is so wide open. You have other players that are on 4 and 8 teams or something that are looking at
sure. And the transfer portal is going to make a difference for coaches that know how to navigate it. Now, the other side of the transfer portal, and we can talk about this probably for an entire episode, is literally most of the players there are not the best players that are available. Now, there are some, but I'm talking if you have 100, 5 of those are worth having. The rest of them are situational or didn't work out, didn't pan out, couldn't make a 2 deep or 3 deep. So it's not as simple, because A&M gets this criticism. I know Sark has gotten this criticism for not pulling up O-linemen from the transfer portal. And the end of the day is there's probably 2 offensive linemen that were worth having out of the transfer portal, and the rest of them are just more of the same of what you already have.
Transfer portal, though, 4 words, boss, and I'll drop it at that. South Carolina Spencer Rattler.
Yeah, you're proving my point.
I think we should rename the show the Spencer Rattler Experience. I think that's a better name for the show.
All right, so I'm going to take the reins back again as the host. Jim, University of Texas San Antonio at Texas. Texas is a 12.5-point favorite as of this morning. It's a 7 p.m. game at Darrell K. Royal Texas Memorial Stadium. What's the prognosis?
I really see. I think 10 or 12 feels right to me. I kind of think I'm looking 31-21. I do think that night game, if our crowd, we earned the name the T-Sips for a reason. It isn't, if we can roll out for UTSA the way we rolled out for Alabama, then I think a 10-point win feels good no matter who's playing quarterback.
Okay.
I think like you touched on earlier, UTSA is extremely well coached. They lost their offensive coordinator to Illinois in the offseason, but they don't appear to have missed much. I think on the heels of last week, man, what a stern test, and with banged up quarterbacks too. It should really be UTSA is a tough opponent. They just are. What they showed last year and the way those guys are going with the program. I think Texas wins. But to your point, Jim, I think the crowd is a huge factor in that. But my goodness, guys, that 3 years ago, that looked like a blip on your radar.
Yeah.
This year, that speed bump got large rather quickly.
I think for the head coach at UT San Antonio, this is an audition game for him. So that team's going to be up because he is a guy that is a very well-known former Texas high school football coach who has a D1 job who wants to be at a bigger program. And I would be shocked if he doesn't have designs on at some point being the head coach at the University of Texas. So the best way to audition for the University of Texas is to beat them on their home field and not coach for A&M, because Texas would never hire an A&M coach. So I think this team's going to be up to play Texas. And I do worry, and it comes down to coaching and how well you motivate your team. I think Sark has to really concentrate on keeping his team's emotional level at a high state. They don't have to be as up as they were for Alabama, but they can't take this team lightly, and look forward to Tech next week, because that game in Lubbock's going to be tough. So you've got some disadvantages. You're banged up on your skill positions a little bit. So who's going to get the ball to your wide receivers? I think this game, like many games, comes down to how well your D-line dominates their offensive line, which isn't as good as it was last year, from what I can tell. So I think it's probably a little bit closer than 12.5, and I'm probably laying 7 to 9. I hate talking betting odds because I sound gross doing it, but I think Texas wins, but I think it's close.
I'd take the under.
Speaking of betting lines, there is no betting line for Missouri State.
Yeah,
Arkansas,
weird.
because they don't put those kind of lines out until day of, because it's going to be like a 30-point line.
Yeah.
So what does Arkansas need to do to have a successful, a positive thing against Missouri State, besides just don't get hurt?
Show up and don't get hurt. Show up and don't get hurt. I mean, look, typically Arkansas versus Missouri State, it's like, okay, everybody, let's get our homecoming. Let's have everybody here. Let's have some parades. It's no big deal. The Bears are coming to town. They're driving down from Springfield. We'll write them a check for $1 million and they'll go home. But this is a little bit added feature this week for the Arkansas Razorbacks with Missouri State, because Missouri State is coached by the one and only Bobby Petrino. And when you have Bobby Petrino's name coming up around Arkansas, suddenly things get interesting. Now, I will liken Bobby Petrino to kind of how the Polish people saw the Germans. The Germans were there for 6 years and they caused a bunch of problems inside Poland, but it's the Russians they're really upset with. And in our case, the Russian, because they were there for 40 years and they really wrecked it. For us, the Russians are John L. Smith and Chad Morris. Bobby Petrino was a blip on the radar at this point. Thanks, Bobby. Go away, Bobby. It's going to be interesting to see how he's received back at Razorback Stadium. But I think I think that Petrino, he's going to prepare his team. They're going to come out. I do think the first half will be closer than we want it to be, because the players, the current coaching staff, all these people, they don't have the students. They don't have a beef with Bobby Petrino. The people who have a beef are the fans and the administrative staff that had to put up with his antics and the way he treated people when he was there.
And some former volleyball players.
And some former diving coaches that beat him with a crowbar because he was, fooling around with
Look, Scott,
happened to be a former volleyball
Arkansas is going to beat Missouri State by a whole lot. We've got 7 minutes left in the show. I want to dig into the one game that actually might be close.
Hey, we lost to a Sun Belt team. So the fact that we have Miami, Ohio coming in and we're playing a MAC team, Fisher has proven that they can't take that lightly. Miami, Ohio is strong in the MAC. They play. I don't know a lot about them. Neither of you took the bait on that.
Yeah, so your Miamis are mixed up. Now I know you're accustomed to losing to lower ranked teams. However, I'm dressed for Miami. You're dressed for Ohio.
Wait.
That's the difference.
We're not playing the U. We're playing the MAC team. I'm positive.
Oh, I think you absolutely are playing.
It's the U?
No, it's the U.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. We're 5.5. It's all about the U, baby. So my lame attempt at humor did not go well there, but we'll move forward.
It's important that you can laugh through the tears. It really is important that you can do that.
I think A&M's going to come out and surprise people. I think Kyle Field is going to turn it around. I think A&M wins. So
here's the good thing. The students, our online fans suck, like most schools, and we're reactionary and horrible, and everybody needed to be fired and DFA'd and everything else you want to say after last week's game. The students showed up. They camped out for tickets. They're going to be there nearly 40,000 strong. The stadium will be full. It will be rocking. It's a night ESPN game, 8:00. People will have all day to tailgate, so it should be rowdy. Not LSU rowdy, because nobody needs that in the state of Texas, but rowdy. We are going to put out a new quarterback who does have Division I experience. He played at LSU. LSU fans are weirdly kind of ambivalent about him. Nobody was sad to see him go. But Max Johnson, to me, especially watching him last year beat A&M with the long ball, probably has a better chance to excel in what Jimbo Fisher wants to do offensively than Haynes King does at this point. I think he's a shot in the arm the team needs. I think getting our offensive line back together and starting to play well, this sets up an awful lot like Alabama last year, where we looked really mediocre up until we had a game that we started getting all in on. Coaching staff's all in on this. And you could argue maybe they should be for every game, but they're definitely all in on this game. The players are all in on this game. This is a giant recruiting weekend for A&M. And so there will be literally 100 4- and 5-star players from all across the country at this game. There's a lot of motivation. And I just don't think that Cristobal has Miami where they need to be quite yet. They haven't been tested. So it's going to be an interesting game. I think it's close, but I like the 5.5 point favorite that A&M is. Hopefully I'm not disappointed again, because right after that we have Arkansas coming up. So there's no rest for the weary. And we need a win before we head to AT&T Stadium to see the Jerry Joneses.
Yeah, and I hate to play the what if game, but I mean, how hot does the seat get for Fisher? Seriously, if things don't go the way you want them to against Miami, and then you've got these guys loading behind 4-0 was not out of the realm of possibility a couple of weeks ago, and now you're looking at it, and there is a path to 1-3, and I think if
there's also a path to 4-1 before you get to Alabama.
Absolutely, and I think if you get there, then the ship is fine. It's sailing along.
So
I do think the next 2 weeks are kind of big for your program. It really are.
This is why I hate our fan base and the people, the unreasonable people that host on Texags and words like that. You lose this game against App State. You have the initial wailing and gnashing of teeth, and that's fine. I understand that. There's an emotional reaction. Football generates that. But it's gotten to this point over the course of the week that people are second-guessing Jimbo Fisher, who prior to that game, everybody was saying is an elite coach. So you don't become a non-elite coach because of one loss. It takes a while to get there. The administration at A&M and the boosters and all the BBs, to use a parlance that Jim likes, they're all still aligned behind Jimbo Fisher. And there's a lot of money behind Jimbo Fisher. And there's a lot of infrastructure coming because of Jimbo Fisher. So that's not going to change this year. What's going to change next year is a probably serious conversation, if things go really bad this year, about how he structures his offense, where he's spending his time, and what happens from there. Recruiting's where it needs to be. Conceivably, you're hearing people say things like you could be 1-3, and there are some people, they're not going to win another game this year. The same way they said when we struggled against Vandy starting out the 2020 season and ended up 9-1. So we could have a crappy season. We could go 500, or the worst case for us actually is 8-4, because that's what everybody expects us to do. You're an 8-4 team. You're always going to be an 8-4 team, but we could go 11-1 because we have that level of talent. It's just a matter of all those things aligning. And I think the worst thing that could happen is that we were rebuilding an offensive line again for really the second year in a row. And if your offensive line doesn't work, I will 100% believe this the rest of my life. If your offensive line doesn't work, you're not going to win football games at a consistent level. When it works, you can do different things. And that's our biggest struggle right now. Changing quarterbacks, we're given a new shot in the arm. I like us at 5.5. Maybe it's a touchdown win, but that's where I am.
All right.
So what else?
I think we've said all that needs to be said.
All right. Once again,
I'm going to go start making the Mai Tais for the weekend.
I need to do a show someday with people who don't own that many Hawaiian shirts.
I'll bring a new one. I will not bring a new one next week.
So next week we'll be talking about what happened on Saturday. We'll be looking at A&M Arkansas and Texas Tech. Until then, I'm Andy Tomchesson. He's James Christopher. That's Scott McIntyre. Probably taking a mud bath after this. And this is Yell, Fight, Sooie.
Y'all Fight Sooie is part of the Let's Get To network. Y'all Fight Sooie is produced by Twitchy Dolphin Media.